Is this the worst single malt whiskey in the world? Stay tuned for the Whiskey Whistle. Hey everybody, why don't you come with me to the Scottish Highlands? It's going to be a blast. Hey my whiskey people, Mark here from Whiskey Whistle on YouTube, sharing a little whiskey awesomeness from Winnipeg, the center of North America, bringing you the worst whiskey in the world. Part 2, single malts. Let's answer this question. Is this the worst single malt whiskey in the world? We are talking about famous and infamous Glenlivet Founders Reserve. So, let me ask you again, is this the worst single malt whiskey in the world? Backtrack a few years when this came out, it really made quite a lot of people angry. In fact, some people I know took a sword to this whiskey on film. They've since deleted that. And a lot of other people have really bemoaned the lack of quality in Founders Reserve from Glenlivet. So I'm here. We're going to open this up. I've never tasted Founders Reserve. By the way, now they have Captain's Reserve out. I wonder how that is. I guess that'll be coming soon. But we're going to open this up. We are going to talk about the color of the whiskey. We'll check out the legs of the whiskey. And then we'll check out the nose, the palate, and the finish of Glenlivet Founders Reserve before we give it a Whiskey Whistle whiskey score at the end of the show. And then we'll answer the question, is this the worst single malt whiskey in the world? Let's get that open. So this is a no age statement whiskey. What that means is there's no number on here telling us the age of the whiskey. It says 1824, but that's not the number we're talking about. We're talking about the number that says 12 years old or 8 years old or 18 years old. This is in a category of whiskey that doesn't have that. So that way the producer can focus, well, what they say is focus on quality and not age. And what we say, whiskey critic, whiskey reviewer category of people, what we say is that it gives the producer the ability to cheapen the whiskey, the power to change the age depending on market constraints. There's two ways to look at it, but the truth, of course, let's figure that out with this one. All right, so let's open that up. That was a very unpleasant popping of the cork. Well, that's about as good as it gets. All right, now I've got my Glenlivet nosing glass here and Glenlivet Founders Reserve. Let's pour that. We're going to pour a generous sample. That way I can make sure it's good or not good, or it's the worst or it's the best. All right, so that's poured. I got this glass, actually, really an interesting story, in Korea at a Glenlivet event. I took a buddy of mine, Fred. Hey, Fred, how you doing? We went to this great event put on by Glenlivet, including dinner, including dessert, and we tried every single age-stated Glenlivet from 12 all the way up to 25. It was a paradigm-changing whiskey event, and I hope they do more of that in centers all over the world. All right, so the color. Let's have a look at the color of the Glenlivet Founders Reserve. What do you see there for color? Pretty much your standard whiskey hue, medium gold, and most likely there's a bit of color added there. And I think I've got a bit of cork floating in my glass there. All right, so that's the color of the whiskey. Now let's check out the legs of the whiskey. What do we see there for legs? Fairly quick, not well defined, little bit watery looking. There are some encouraging secondary legs coming through. Let's hope that that means we'll have something nice in the mouth, but I have a feeling that it's going to be a little bit thin. Okay, so Glenlivet Founders Reserve. Let's figure out if that is the worst whiskey in the world for single malts. I'll tell you right off the bat, the nose is pleasant. It's fresh, it's fruity. And in terms of age, I'm going to say that that is 8 to 10 years old. The nose tells me that it's actually quite nice. I'm getting a hint of citrus. I'm getting a little bit of apple. I'm getting a little bit of clover honey. Quite a bit of vanilla is coming through as well. So vanilla, honey, citrus, apple. Poached pears. Very fresh, very fruity. A little bit of oak spice, a hint of cinnamon, a tiny little bit of nutmeg. This likely has a mixture of casks. American oak ex-bourbon, American oak ex-sherry, and what they call Scotch whisky casks, which basically means they've been used a few times in the Scotch whisky industry. And Glenlivet, as everybody should know, is an unpeated style of whiskey. It's not smoky. Price-wise, by the way, I didn't mention that. So for the full bottle, that's a half bottle. For the full bottle in Manitoba, that's about $56 plus tax. Meanwhile, the 12-year-old is about $60 plus tax. So a $5 difference, which for most people is actually meaningless. I think $10 would be a good spread. Anyway, the nose is very encouraging. A little bit of orange zest with some like panna cotta, that kind of milky pudding. A little bit of that citrus rind. Anyway, so from the nose, no, it's certainly not the worst whiskey in the world, and actually has a very nice nose considering that it is, let's say, 8 to 10 years old, maybe even 7, possibly an average age of 10. Hard to say. It's their secret. On to the palate. I'm a little worried here. Am I going to survive? Cheers, everybody. Now, the palate, unfortunately, is where things fall apart for this whiskey. It does taste watered down. There is a little bit of sharpness that's unfamiliar to me as far as Glenlivet is concerned. I'll put that right there. I'm sure you know what I'm going to do. There's a glass here. I'll let you figure that out. Yes, the fruit comes through. Vanilla cream, a little bit of citrus, poached pears, cinnamon, ginger, and nutmeg. Yeah, it's there. But the thing is that it is presented as a whiskey light. And you got to watch that term coming up because apparently there's whiskey light coming. White and Mackay has already made a whiskey light. It is 40%, however. On the finish, it's very short. There's quite a bit of astringency and bitterness. Predominantly oak centered. And I'm not really getting a lot of good flavor coming through in the finish. Just that dry astringency. Well, even though it is 40%, I'm going to add a little bit of water about not quite 1 milliliter to that. Let that sit for a minute. And then we're going to pour a little bit of Glenlivet 12-year-old. $5 more. Interestingly, it's not as fruity. But I can definitely smell the age, which for me makes this a superior whiskey by far. Oh, and then comes a very nice rich fruit syrup. Gummy fruits, the sherry matured whiskey is very noticeable here in the 12-year-old. Even though it's 40%, same ABV, it's thick, it's rich, it fills the mouth. There's substance left there. The finish nicely lingers. And there isn't that harshness, that astringency that I'm finding in Founder's Reserve. Okay, so Founder's Reserve with water added. I love the nose. I'll tell you that. It's got a beautiful nose. Very fruity, very fresh. It's like a citrus version of juicy fruit. Juicy fruit is gonna move ya. This one, it's not gonna move you much. Well, interesting. The best way to enjoy this neat, well, I should say, not to enjoy it neat, to add a few drops of water in there. So if it's 20 milliliters like I've got left here, then add about half a milliliter of water, up to maximum 1, so just a little bit. That's nowhere close to a teaspoon. That's, well, 1/5 of a teaspoon. The sherry is coming out here now with that water added. Subtly juicy and creamy on the palate now. And a little bit of apricot and peach left on the finish. So this seems like it is predominantly American oak ex-bourbon matured. This one has probably something like half and half. At least a third sherry. Anyway, one more sip. I'm enjoying the event with the water added, as I mentioned. Much fruitier. Lots of apricot and peach on the finish. Fruity and not bad. For $55 in Winnipeg in Manitoba, it's not a bad choice. There are some better choices for a lesser price than this. Glenmoray would be the obvious choice for me. And also Ardmore. I think it's too far away to for me to reach over there. It's right over there. But for the Glenlivet lover, I think this is going to disappoint. Stick to your 12-year-old. And sorry for the noise. Okay, so for the Glenlivet lover, for your budget dram, go for the 12-year-old. Thick, juicy, and rich on the mouth. For your everyday person wanting to get into a bit of Scotch, this might be okay. But keep in mind, as I mentioned, a bit astringent. So add, a couple drops of water to really appreciate the event at its best. So to answer the question, is the Glenlivet Founders Reserve the worst single malt in the world? And the answer is no, absolutely not. It's decent. Not my favorite Glenlivet. I suppose it ticks a box for them and might get a few extra sales given the lower price point. However, I'm not sure how many people will come back to this again and again. Perhaps some bars that want to make cocktails with single malt, Speyside single malt, that would be an inexpensive way to do so. But for your everyday punter, as Ralphie says, probably this isn't really going to float your boat. All right, anyway, so let's get on to the WhiskyWhistle Whiskey score for the Glenlivet Founders Reserve. Well, folks, the WhiskyWhistle Whiskey score for Glenlivet Founders Reserve is going to be 78 out of 100. Yep, you heard it. 78 out of 100 is the WhiskyWhistle Whiskey score for the Glenlivet Founders Reserve. And we've got the Captain's Reserve here in Winnipeg, so I'll get to that as soon as I can. I've got lots of stuff that I have to do. This Kleinlich Distillers Edition, Deanston 18. There's a Deanston 18 review from a year ago. This one's, however, batch 2. And Ben Romach, 10-year-old, 100 degrees proof. That's 57 degrees, 57% ABV. Lagavulin Distillers Edition. This interesting North Star independent bottler, Tobermory, 10-year-old. Knob Creek. I've got Knob Creeks. I've got, all kinds of stuff I need to get to. Redbreast back there, 12 and 15. So stay tuned to WhiskyWhistle. Lots to come. Hit subscribe if you like this video. And click the bell. Please click the bell so you're notified of the future Whiskey Whistles, especially if you really like what I've done here. And there's lots more to come, as I mentioned. And if you happen to be in Winnipeg, check out the Winnipeg Whiskey Club, winnipegwhiskeyclub.com. Also on Facebook as Winnipeg Whiskey Club and Friends. Twitter, Instagram, you'll find me there. And lastly, if you really, really love what I'm doing here, then why not support me through Patreon? Patreon.com/WhiskyWhistle. All right? Take care, everybody. We'll see you for the next one. Goodbye. Thanks for watching Whiskey Whistle. Be sure to subscribe. And don't forget to give this video a like. And leave a comment down below. Be sure to stay tuned next time to join me, the host of the show, Mark, as I explore more whiskeys with you. Take care now, and we'll see you next time.